And welcome to Davos, and welcome to this debate brought to you by France 24 in cooperation with the World Economic Forum. I'm Marcus Carlson in Davos. The topic of our discussion here today is Europe's young and their future. Almost a quarter of 15 to 24-year-olds in the Eurozone, in the 17 countries that use the single currency, are currently out of jobs, are without jobs, or outside of education. In some countries, like Greece and like Spain, that rate exceeds 50%. Evidence shows the longer someone is out of a job, the more difficult it is to get one. Also, young people who have to search for employment are at great risk of getting stuck in low-paid jobs and short-term contracts. It begs the question, is Europe facing a lost generation, and how do you prevent that kind of scenario from playing out? We have a great panel with us here today to discuss this issue. We're going to hear from them in just a moment. We're going to start, though, with a message from 3 Europeans who have first-hand experience of the problem.
Se ve uno incapacitado en no poder ir a ningún trabajo, no estar trabajando, en estar todos los días en casa. Se te van quitando las ganas de salir a trabajar.
Περιμένω κάποια στιγμή να καταλάβουν ότι η κρίση που την έχουν στοιχειοθετήσει ουσιαστικά σε νούμερα, ότι δεν έχει να κάνει με νούμερα, έχει να κάνει με ανθρώπινες ζωές. Και ότι από τη στιγμή που οι νέοι δεν έχουν μέλλον, δεν έχουν τώρα να προσφέρουν, δεν θα υπάρχει μέλλον.
So when I started college, we expected to walk into jobs, and when I finished college, we found the situation was very different.
Mi esperanza es que los gobiernos, sobre todo el nuestro, claro, se espabile y quiera que los jóvenes no solo sean mano de obra, sino que también sean personas cualificadas y que el trabajo que desempeñen esas personas que sean cualificadas.
Ότι δεν είναι να πεις ότι είναι μια προσωρινή κατάσταση, όπως ήταν ας πούμε πιο παλιά που έλεγες εντάξει ψάχνω να βρω μια δουλειά, δεν κατάφερα αυτό το μήνα, θα καταφέρω τον επόμενο, κάποια στιγμή ότι θα βρω. Πλέον οι πιθανότητες να βρεις δουλειά είναι, ξέρω εγώ, ψηλή στα άχυρα.
Our political and economic leaders don't seem to be tackling that at the moment. They don't seem to be understanding how it's very difficult for someone our age who doesn't have the experience, who doesn't have necessarily the education.
All right, there you have a snapshot of the problem that lies before us. Let me introduce you to our panelists today. First of all, ladies first, I suppose. Sharan Burrow, she is the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation. In that capacity, she represents 175 million workers in 153 different countries. Rajeeb, he is the founder and chief executive of Internships.com, which connects young people with jobs and internships in startup companies. He's also part of the Young Global Leaders, an initiative, of course, by the World Economic Forum. Jonathan Teklu, he is a co-founder and managing partner of Springstar. I suppose you can call it an internet incubator, which starts up and helps out internet companies. He's also part of the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers community. László, Andor, closest to me, is a European Commissioner, and he is in charge of employment, social affairs and inclusion. Last but certainly not least, we have Maurice Lévy. He is the chairman and chief executive of the communications and advertising company Publicis. He's also a member of the World Economic Forum's foundation board. Thank you to all of you for participating in this very important discussion, in my opinion. Jonathan Teklu, let me start with you. You're young. You're based in the Eurozone, so in short, you're part of the demographic that we're focusing on in this debate. Why do young people, in your mind, in Europe, don't get jobs? Why don't they get jobs, rather?
I think my answer to that is very similar to everyone else's answer. I think the economy is weakened, and it's not easy to get a job. There aren't those jobs out there.
But the youth unemployment rate, after all, is still higher than the general unemployment rate. Why, in your opinion, is that?
Well, that's more difficult for me to understand, because in the industry where I'm in, it's very good to have those young people, because we are building new technologies, and those people adapt the new technologies very fast based on those social media activities. They are used to it, you know. So for me, from my point of view, from an internet technology point of view, it's very hard to understand that.
Rajeeb Day, you work with sort of connecting young people with jobs and internships. You really know how the labour market works and what works and what doesn't work. Why, in your opinion, are we facing this situation?
So I think Jonathan obviously talked about the demand side of the economy being poor, but I think there's a supply side issue, which is that we simply do not equip young people with the skills that they need for the world of work. And I think that goes back to their education. I think many employers complain that young people don't have some of the soft skills they're looking for around communication skills, leadership skills, and simply they did not have exposure to the world of work earlier on. So in my opinion, I think we should make education far more experiential. We should be encouraging them to do work experience, internships from an early age, so they really get a taste of what it's like to be in the world of work, so they're ready to hit the ground running when they finish their education. And so we really need to go back to basics. So whilst there is obviously this crisis right now, we really need to look at how we remodel the education system.
Sharan Burrow, are there political reasons for the high youth unemployment?
Absolutely. There's a lack of political will. If this was a business risk, if you had 60% of your capital at risk in any business, then the business would be down in the war room with all of their best thinkers trying to figure out how to actually rescue the company. These are our communities. These are our children and grandchildren. They're at risk of not having the dignity of labour or the opportunities that their parents have. Parents know this, by the way. This is not a new phenomena. Our global poll showed 8 months ago that overwhelmingly the world's parents and grandparents say the next generation will be worse off. So why aren't we seeing this as the social and economic risk that it is? It's a time bomb for our communities. And yet the will, the political will, has not been there to act.
Do you agree with that, László Andor?
Well, I agree the political will is absolutely decisive. That's why the European Commission, when we proposed various solutions, instruments to address this very dramatic situation in the EU and especially in Southern Europe, we work for convincing the member states, the national governments, in order to come to the right conclusions and take action, because action is which will make a change.
But do you think there is that political willingness, really, among European governments, the point that Sharan was just making?
Well, we wouldn't be here in this situation if the political determination had been there in the past here. So that's why we need to create this, to assemble the cooperation of the national governments and also the employers and the employees' organizations in order to work for solutions.
Maurice, Lévy, you're looking at this from a big business perspective. What is your take on youth unemployment?
Okay, when I look at Publicis, we are job creators. So in net, we are creating jobs every year, but we are not an example of the whole industry or what's happening in the labor market. I think that without putting too much of a blame to the former generation of politicians, it is clear that since more than 20 years, the consequences of globalization have not been drawn, and we have not adapted our education system, our labor laws, our own organization to face the consequences of cheap labor law in emerging market, and also the fact that we had to be more innovative. So there is a lot of consequences which have been not taken into account. The second aspect is regarding some countries, and particularly if we are speaking about the country I know well, which is France. Unfortunately, since the 70s, we have not made the right decision regarding immigration and the assimilation and preparation and the integration of the immigrant. Everyone was blindsided and was not willing to make the right decision, which was to say, okay, we have to give a proper housing, we have to give a proper education, and we have to prepare these people to really face the toughness of this new world. And we have plenty of people who are willing to work, but they are not prepared. And they are knocking at the door, and the door remains closed. And on top of that, one of the consequences of globalization is the fact that the mature market have lost market share, including a very good market like Germany. When you look at, you compare Germany 20 years ago and what was the strength of Germany and what it is today, even if they have done a very good job these last few years, they have lost market share, they have lost jobs, they have lost a lot of things, and they had to rethink everything in order to face all these consequences. So we have today to pay a higher price for the mistakes which have been made in the last 20, 30 years.
I want to pick up on the education point that you were just making there, Maurice, and I want to ask you, Jonathan, Teklu, did you feel, you grew up in Germany, did you feel that the German education system, did it equip you with the tools needed for your now career as an internet entrepreneur?
I'm afraid to say no, not at all actually, because all the things, so I started to work within the first company I started at age 18, so I didn't know a lot about the things I needed to know in order to run that company. So I had to learn by really trying things out, and I failed and I did it again. So it didn't prepare me for what I did, but I think the general situation after university, after you have done several internships like you are offering to your clients, I think then you are prepared way better than I was when I started at age 18.
Sharan, I saw you nodding there several times.
Well, the skills alignment question is a serious one, but it's one that we can easily solve. You look at Germany, though, and in terms of youth unemployment, the numbers are much, much lower because they have still invested in a business, labour, government environment where apprenticeships are the transition pathway for many, many young people to be included in the labour market, to get the skills and the qualifications necessary from school to that work benchmark. So if the business community and labour globally have any influence on governments, we have said, while we're investing in jobs, jobs and jobs, because that's the real issue, there aren't enough jobs. If, while we're doing that, we want to make a difference and include young people in productive futures, give them a sense of purpose, then we will scale up apprenticeships or equivalent inclusion programs where businesses are taking responsibility, labour through their labour unions takes responsibility, and governments as a backing partner. Now, we've called for a jobs plan in every country. Starting with the G20, every country should have a jobs plan. But within that, we should also move now to scale up the inclusion of people through apprenticeships or equivalent.
As Sharan was just pointing out there, the situation in Germany is a little bit better than it is elsewhere in Europe, especially in southern Europe. László, Andor, why do you think that southern European countries haven't obviously done the same things as the German government perhaps has done?
Indeed, Germany has a good performance. The real champions are Austria and the Netherlands. And indeed, we have the ingredients there for the successful models, which is good foundation, strong foundation in education and training, well-organized school-to-work transition, and reaching out to the marginalized communities, which is always more vulnerable. And that's why we actually propose the best models, taking over by the South, by others from Austria and Finland, which we call the Youth Guarantee, which is based on the cooperation of the government and the social partners. It guarantees that after leaving school or becoming unemployed, there should be no more than 4 months in this situation, and the government should guarantee a quality offer for these young people. Traineeships, apprenticeship, or a proper job, or further education. And then this cooperation should be able to provide these offers. This is not a silver bullet which would resolve everything, but by achieving this on the European level, I believe we could really make a change and we could prevent this generation to be lost.
Rajeeb, I want to bring you in as well. I want to ask you, as I was saying before, you hook up young people with jobs and internships. What kind of skills do you think are missing now? Who doesn't get a job and why is that?
So, I mean, we at Internships really focus on startups and SMEs. So these are companies that don't have the brands of the HR departments to recruit directly from campus. And what we're finding, and Jonathan mentioned this, is that these startups are looking for young, dynamic talent that really want to hit the ground running. So really, they're looking for more attitudinal alignment rather than necessarily particular skills, although in the tech sector there is definitely, at least in the UK, a shortage of computer scientists and programmers. And so there are specific skill shortages that are being identified through our work. But I think a lot of it is to do with attitude. And I think in particular we need to get more young people exposed to the whole spectrum of employers that are out there, from startups, SMEs, as well as big employers, so that they have a range of choice and opportunities out there to choose from.
Maurice, Lévy, does your company, does it have trouble finding this young, dynamic talent that Rajeeb Day was just talking about?
There is scarcity of talent when it comes to creativity, when it comes to digital. It's very hard. Very often we have to train the people ourselves, or we have to hire people out of the university or the college, and they know very little. But that is not a very difficult thing to do. This is relatively easy. In fact, there is two elephants in the room, and we have to face that. The first elephant is the fact that we are in a low-growth economy and for a long period of time. And in this low-growth economy that we have in Europe, we have some markets like Spain, Italy, and Greece, which will have even a lower level of growth, and maybe France tomorrow, I don't know. But we are in this low-growth economy. With the low-growth economy, you don't create jobs. Not only you don't create jobs, you destroy jobs. So that's clear. And as long as we don't address that issue, we will hardly be in a position to create jobs. The second elephant in the room is that in most countries, we have privileged the jobs which are in place to the job created. And all the dispute, discussion, negotiation with the unions and government, etc., is to say, okay, there is what in French we call les avantages acquis, what we have acquired through tough battles. And if you look at one of the stupid things that we have done in France, which is a 35-hour week, all this is not generating jobs, and people want to protect this. And as long as they want to protect this, it is clear that it will be very hard to open up for new jobs. So these are the two elephants. We can always debate, discuss, etc., in the fringes, but fundamentally, when you look at what has been done in Germany by the so-called Gerhard Schröder Agenda 2010, it was to revisit all the agreements and to change a lot of things in order to have in mind, okay, how can we be more competitive in order to face competition of the world? How can we be more flexible in order to open for more jobs? And how can we be more friendly between unions and employers in order to face in good faith all the issues. And I think that they have done a fantastic job, and the results are there. During that time, in some countries, we have widened the gap. And that's the problem. And as long as we don't look at these aspects, and as long as we don't say, okay, these are the two elephants of the room, and we have to address that, we will discuss nicely, and we will have plenty of things we will be discussed, but we will not fix the issues.
Let me challenge the second. The first I absolutely agree with. We thought it was insanity to go into an austerity program from an expansionary program in London with the G20 in Pittsburgh, jobs at the centre, 6 months later to austerity without a growth plan. Without a growth plan. Fiscal consolidation can only ever be achieved, particularly in a pro-cyclical environment, with something that leverages growth of income, and that means jobs. But, so on the first we agree, and Europe needs a jobs plan. On the second though, we have to be careful about this. What are we saying our community should look like? Are we really going to fire the mother or the father supporting a family to hire the son or daughter on lower wages in some sort of false competitiveness with living standards of $2, $3, $4 a day in terms of the developing world? Is that the Europe that people want? It's not what workers and their families want. We want to see inclusion of young people. We want to see, at the same time, though, as we're including them in transitions, the jobs invested in infrastructure, and indeed in the care economy, in new industry policy settings, which Germany does very well, so that you can actually continue to build our communities, not punish parents or grandparents in order to pay lower wages for insecure jobs for young people. That's not what they want either.
I want to move on in just a moment, but Maurice, Lévy, you are itching to respond to that.
No, just I think that you are great at caricaturing the idea, but I agree that it is not to fire the grandparent or to bury them or to fire the parents and to give $2 or $3 a day to youngsters. I think this is a interesting caricature, and it looks like classic unions employer discussion, but I think that we can have something which is in the middle, which has nothing to do with firing, which has nothing to do with giving cheap wages, but which has to do with competitiveness and helping the corporations to be competitive and to build product and to produce product in our countries and to export them at a price which is competitive. That's it.
And that I agree with, by the way.
Okay.
Unions bargain up and we bargain down.
That's good.
Right.
And we can find the solutions together.
I want to turn to László Andor. The International Labour Organization says that youth unemployment will remain elevated for at least another half a decade. Do you and the European Commission agree with that forecast and that projection?
It's true unless we do something. I don't agree with the assumption that if we have a low growth scenario, we can do nothing, just wait for a recovery, wait for higher rates of growth, and then the unemployment problem will be resolved. The fact that we are facing a period of low growth means that we need to do more. We need to find more instruments against unemployment, and particularly against youth unemployment, new schemes that can be found. We can be more efficient in transferring the better schemes like the dual training system of Germany and Austria can be transferred much faster to countries which now realize that they have to do something in order to give a chance and give hope to their young people, particularly in countries like Italy or Spain. Mm-hmm. So yes, we can make projections, but these projections are always good to warn everyone that unless we really change course, we will lose the generation and we will face much greater social and political problems.
Rajeeb, I just want to ask you another question and sort of bring in another topic. What does it mean if a young person is out of a job for 2 or 3 years? Does that mean that that person will have to live with that for the rest of his or her life?
I think obviously it causes a scar and really brings you down to be constantly faced with rejection. You're applying to hundreds of companies and you're just getting rejected time and time again. That's obviously going to bring you down. But I think just linking to the previous point about looking at solutions, I think one of this is to also harness more of an entrepreneurial mindset and to show young people that entrepreneurship is a viable and rewarding career path. I mean, you have two kind of young entrepreneurs that we both set up our businesses straight out of education. And I think we need to send the message that young people can also make a job rather than take a job. And in doing so, actually create more jobs for other young people.
Jonathan Teklu?
So when I started the company, my intention was not to create jobs, to be honest. Yeah, I just wanted to get out the product and do what I wanted to do. But at the end, like with the company we are running now, Springstar, we have invested in about 25 other companies all around the world, and they could create 4,500 jobs, and now people are coming to us, hey, thanks for creating those jobs. I think it is a really good approach to tell young people that when you find something, what you really like to do, you know, when you're really passionate about it, when you are brave enough, and I think if I had been unemployed, I had one reason more to start something because I have no other choice, right? So I think it's good also from society to accept that and encourage young people more to do what they really want to do. And I think there are a lot of great possibilities out there. You know, we are getting like 20, 25 ideas. Sometimes they're really crazy when you first read them, and when you then meet the people, you know, they're almost crying and telling, I want to do that, and whether you give me money or not, I'm going to do that. I come back in a year. So that's also, so it's not a lost generation. That's not how I would call it.
László.
And in fact, the European Union can support such initiatives with microcredit schemes and the European Social Fund. So we have also the financial means to support this.
Maurice, Lévy, are European societies, are they bad at fostering entrepreneurship?
I wouldn't say that. I think that we have maybe too many fences and too many barriers, and this is something that we inherited from the legacy of the past. But we see a lot of great opportunities. There is something that we have done with Orange, the telephone company. And we have decided to create a fund, Publicis and Orange, and we have now gathered something like 300 million euros in order to finance small startups, the early stage, as well as growth company in the startups. And the result is fascinating. The number of proposals that we are seeing, the number of young people who want to do that, and they agree with Jonathan, we are not with the lost generation in that field. But I would say in that field, because the vast majority, unfortunately, is facing huge problem. And if you go in the suburbs, but not only of Paris, of Marseille, but you can go in Barcelona, or you can go in Athens, you see a lot of misery, and you see a lot of people who do not know well how to read, how to write, and who are facing enormous difficulties to enter in the business in the adult age, having a job, being responsible. And when you have seen these three witnesses, I think it's expressing everything, which is about desperation. These people want to work. They are not saying, okay, I'm happy with the money that the state is giving me or anything like this. They want a job, and they want a real job because they have real lives. They want to build a family. And we as entrepreneurs and we as a society, we are guilty of not offering that job.
We're going to have to take a break here because time is running quickly. We're going to come back to this discussion, and when we come back in the second part of this debate, we're going to talk and hone in on the solutions. Stay with us here on France 24. All right, thank you very much. 35. Ready to go for second half? Back, you're watching France 24 and a special debate brought to you from Davos in cooperation with the World Economic Forum on youth unemployment. And we're going to hone in, we're going to pick up where we left, we're going to hone in on the solutions now, what we can do to prevent a lost generation in Europe. László, Andor, you mentioned before that the youth guarantee that you are pushing in the European Union. You want governments to get young people either a job or an internship or further education within 4 months of being unemployed. How would this work in real life?
Well, first of all, we have to say that this also would have cost. And we would need to invest in this, but it would be a perfect social investment because the costs of non-action are very high. We calculated that annually it's about 150 billion euros, which is the loss because of leaving this generation on the streets and out of job or training. The cooperation of public employment services, public employment, private agencies, social partners should be able to produce these offers. And then, just like in Austria or Finland, if someone alone doesn't find a job, this would be certainly guaranteed. This would be very important for the security of employment for the young people to help making the first steps on the labour market and prepare a more successful career.
Jonathan Teklu, do you think will that work?
I'm not so sure. But I can't really judge it. I can just give you my point of view from an innovation point of view, an entrepreneurial point of view. I think what Maurice was saying before, that growth is really the thing that can create jobs. And I think this is the only thing that can create jobs. Because if you have an economy that is not growing, you know, whatever the state is going to do, it won't solve the problem from my point of view. So what we have to do is encourage people to start new things. Companies, like big companies, can also innovate. You know, we have to find new ways through technologies, through other ways, in order to achieve growth. I think this is the only way out of it, because it starts at the economy. No matter what other things we can do, it has to be in an environment where we grow as an economy, and then jobs will be created.
Just taking it back to the youth guarantee, do you think it's a step in the right direction, Sharan Burrow?
Without doubt. You have to start, though, where Jonathan just left off. You have to invest in jobs. And growth ought to be job-centred growth. We've seen 30 years almost now of increasingly jobless growth, and we have to turn that around.
But what do you say, what do you mean when you say invest in jobs? What does that mean specifically?
Well, we know we built economies. All the countries of Europe built their own economies. They know by investing in infrastructure, they know by investing in the services that give people community dignity. They know by investing in, new technologies, education, all of those things, that you can build economies. We haven't seen good industry policy because we've been frightened about protectionism. We haven't got the balance between free trade and industry policy that drives new innovation, that gives business confidence. That's a debate we want to have. Mm-hmm. We've got $25 trillion of workers' money invested in the global economy. We want it out of speculative markets and into real economy work, into work where we know that through the transition to the green economy, all sorts of infrastructure requirements, we can build those jobs soon.
But infrastructure requirements, that costs money at the end of the day. A lot of European governments simply don't have that kind of cash at the moment.
But am I actually saying it all has to come from government? I just said workers' capital is $25 trillion. On the balance sheets of companies, there's $6 trillion at the moment, yet the wages share that would create demand versus the profit share is at an all-time low. So you can do some things there. There's $21 trillion in offshore tax havens. Let's get some work back on taxation, which I know the Commission's working on in some areas, and let's stop the attack on labour rights and the fair share of workers' income. That will generate some demand. But at the same time, let's look at the youth guarantee. It works in other countries. It works, as we've said, in Germany, in Austria, works in Australia, my own country, where you're either in education or you're in work, or you picked up with some inclusion program, including apprenticeships, internships, and other areas. But not internships, and I want to say I would not suggest you're doing this, but we now see, frankly, labour theft. We're seeing young people invited into internship after internship, and if you want to see desperation, then watch what happens when they're not paid for any of that work, 3 months, 6 months, and they're back on the churn cycle. We've got to do better. These are our kids. We can take responsibility for a youth guarantee between workers, business and government. It's our responsibility to negotiate the solutions to make them happen.
Maurice, Lévy, Sharan Burrow basically wants big business to pay up. Are you ready to pay up? Sorry, I'm paraphrasing there, I know.
Okay, I think that there are some approximation what has been said. For example, internship. we have people who are begging to be interned, and we say, we are closed, we have no room, please take us. And it is a burden very often for corporations to take internship because we want to help, and at the same time we need somebody who knows to be with this person and to train that person. So I think we should be very cautious about that, and at the end of the day, it is extremely helpful because it gives a first experience. But if we look at the solutions, everything obviously starts with growth, and we all agree on that. And if there is no growth, there will be no job. How can we create the conditions for job creation and for regenerating growth when most of the European countries, and we are speaking mostly about Europe, are broke? And they have a huge level of debt, and they have a huge deficit. And the first thing that they have to fix is the deficit, and we have to pass through a few years, which will be extremely difficult. But as long as we don't fix these issues, this will be a long-term problem, because there will be an implosion one day if we don't fix the issue of debt and deficit. Then we have to agree in a kind of national contrat social where people are sitting down and say, okay, everyone gives something in order to create the condition of a better competitivity in order that we can create a job. Mm-hmm. And we have also to have new investors, and we have to attract new investment in our countries. I think that we are offshoring too much, we are outsourcing too much, but if we do that, it's in order to be competitive, and sometimes it is good to do that, otherwise the corporation itself is disappearing. So the solutions are almost on the table. When we have this new contrat social, and we have an education program, and we have a huge innovation program, because the key word is innovation, innovation, innovation in clean tech, in green industry, in every aspect, including in how to maybe knit new cotton. I don't know. I'm not a specialist, but what I do know is that every time that some of our clients have revisited their industry, they have created jobs, and they have been able to be competitive. And this is a question of confidence, of fairness, and also trust, mutual trust. If there is a good relationship between the unions and the employers, I'm sure that a lot of things could be possible. Mm-hmm. And let the head of state and prime minister fix their own issue, and let the industries and the unions fix the job issue.
Rajeeb.
So I think businesses really fundamentally need to remodel their forms of recruitment. And what we see right now is heads of recruitment are effectively heads of rejection. They are rejecting the vast majority of people that are applying to them. And it is not their fault, because they're faced with thousands of applications. But what I would like to see businesses do is what we're calling unrecruitment, where the whole model of recruitment is based around training and development, so that we can, for every person that applies for a job, how can you make sure that everyone leaves better off in the process? So even though one person will get the job, 99 people can be benefited through the training and development that you do through the process of recruiting someone. Mm-hmm. So rather than just filter and eliminate people out based on your institution or your grades, let's be a bit more inclusive, and let's not see skills development as a CSR activity, but really bring it into the recruitment process. I also want to pick up on the point of internships, and I know it's a contentious subject, but I should say that having seen, we work with over 4,000 businesses, a lot of these are startups and SMEs, and they say to us, and a majority of them do pay, but in some cases, they might start off as an expenses-only intern, but within a few weeks, the young people make themselves indispensable, and they create their own job. And when we ask the company, would that have existed without that experience, they'd say no, because they're not willing to take the risk of hiring someone straight away. And so that's effectively, the internship acts as a try before you buy approach to talent, and then therefore the young person has the opportunity to prove themselves, and as Maurice says, it gives them the first foot on the ladder. That's a good thing, but you've got to have some boundaries, because we've seen people who've had 6, 8, 10 more internships, and they are more devastated than when they came out of universities. Mm-hmm. Internships are usually for highly skilled individuals, so we have interns ourselves, so we're certainly not opposed to that.
But what you have to have is boundaries. Where is the situation where that's a good program around inclusion, and those who would exploit workers without pay, without a mix of the social security, and we could look at that by negotiation. Maurice is absolutely right. We can solve these problems together, but if you've got a social protection system and that translates into part wage subsidies for employers who are employing internships genuinely on an agreed basis, why not? That's a good thing. So the solutions are there for us to work out, but in fairness, with dignity, and with the arrangements that don't actually construct labour theft and desperation. And we owe that to young people.
I think that's a very good point. I think there is also a lot of room for innovation when it comes to bringing people who are looking for jobs together with people who are hiring. Because if I would call now all the CEOs of our companies, they would all tell you immediately, we are desperate, you know, we need more good people, even though we're now discussing since 40 minutes that there are a lot of unemployed young people out there, you know. So we always discuss this little story of the recruiter who is sitting there, and he has like 100 applications, and he just picks it, throws away half of it, and says, I don't want people who are not lucky. You know, just the thing that the companies are not handling it quite well. I think there's also a lot of room for improvement.
I just want to pick up on something that Maurice was referring to before, and put this question to László Andor. Maurice was saying that at some point or another, unions and employers' organizations, maybe they should just agree to get along, and perhaps governments should get out of the picture. What do you say about that? Well, are governments perhaps an impediment at this stage?
We certainly advocate the social dialogue on all levels, on company level, sectoral level, national level, and the EU level. But the governments play a strong role, not least because there is a need for policy consistency, connecting the education, training policies with what is happening in the labour market. And there is also a need for a European dimension. Because it's true that we can, work for competitiveness and growth, and we also need to work for youth-specific schemes like the Youth Guarantee in the member states, because the young generation is less experienced and more vulnerable. So we need to pay special attention, provide special assistance. But the European dimension is this. We have enormous imbalances in the EU, which means that some countries actually have huge amounts of vacancies, and other countries have very large numbers of unemployed youth. We also need to connect this through better mobility, supporting those who want to find a job not necessarily in their own home environment, but maybe in another country, learning other foreign languages, and have access to more dynamic labour markets, not just wait until all Spain will experience a recovery, but right now, or very quickly, have a job in Germany or Denmark. So we need to improve the capacity to find a job elsewhere. We have European Commission website, and we have European financial instruments also to support such projects.
All right, you're saying more mobility. We should all move to Germany, basically. That
Not exactly.
Sharan Burrow, what's your thinking?
Well, I think that governments are indispensable. I agree with Maurice that the social partners have a very serious role, and the B20 and the L20, the labour business construct with the G20 meetings, we have agreements. We have agreements around employment, around rights, around social protection, around coherence, and we've said that our priorities last year in Mexico are investment. Let's look at the investment question that is job-related. Let's get the multiplier-rich framework for employment generation rather than simply an economic analysis. But we've also said in the meantime we want to work together, and the French minister has offered an operationalising meeting of business and labour with, we hope, the OECD and the ILO in France in April to see how we can scale up apprenticeships, including international apprenticeships, as the Commissioner says. So a tripartite environment is necessary if you're going to have the regulation, if you're actually going to have the youth guarantees that include social protection, but that's not walking away from Maurice's challenge, which is also our challenge. The third area we haven't touched on is the informal economy. There's a lot of creativity, innovation, not kind of quite the sort of high-skilled end of the entrepreneurship, but trapped in the desperation of the informal economy. And youth unemployment is driving young people into jobs which are actually withering sustainable business and decent work, because we're not providing the scaffolding of whether it's a minimum wage on which you can live, a social protection floor, the skills, vocational skills environment, or on the a supply side for business, the kind of business regulation, the supporting, the microcredit. We have to tackle that. Some countries now in the G20, let alone globally, it's 40% of the global environment, but in the G20, countries between 20 and 90% of work is informal. That's not a way to rebuild decent work, secure jobs and opportunity.
If there is a lot of creativity bubbling underneath the surface, Rajeeb, how do we unleash that? How do we free that?
I think, firstly, it's an awareness-raising exercise where young people should see entrepreneurship as a viable and rewarding career path, because I think, especially at universities, most of the jobs an organisation are exposed to are big corporate organisations, and you think banking, law, consulting, there are certain career paths, and entrepreneurship isn't necessarily showcased to you as a career path that you can go down. And often there's also this stigma that if you're an entrepreneur, it means you didn't get a proper job. And I think we need to challenge that mindset where actually working for yourself and being an entrepreneur is something that's celebrated and rewarded. But also we should look at practical ways such as mentoring or access to small amounts of capital. We've, in the UK, recently created the Startup Loans programme to give young people small amounts of money to kickstart their ventures. It doesn't really require much with the advances in technology. When I first started, I was working from home. Everything was remote. You can keep costs low. So we just need to really just give them small amounts of money, a little bit of mentoring, and really showcase entrepreneurship as a viable option.
Maurice, Lévy, what do you think of that?
I think that we will need probably 200, 300, 400, 500 solutions. Yeah. I don't believe that there is a silver bullet which will solve all our issues. And I would like also to clarify what I'm saying about government. I'm not expecting that government will solve the issue. I just want that they do their job and that we do ours, period. So I'm not saying that they should not be involved, that they should not write the laws, anything which is absolutely indispensable to have a society well organized, because this is the job of the politicians. But we should not turn to them and saying, please solve our problem. If we don't ourselves do what is necessary to solve the problem, yes, we will have a lost generation. But if we invent, help, innovate, create, innovation is not only about new technology or new systems. It is also about new ideas and how to create a new job, how to create new options for people, etc. We have to be innovative in everything we do if we want to solve our problem. The problem is absolutely enormous. When you see that 60% of the people between 18 to 25 are out of job in Spain, this is really impossible to look at this number and to consider it's just a number, a statistic. Mm-hmm. There are people behind this statistic, and we have a responsibility. And we have to all together work in finding the right solution and not expecting that there will be some miracle which will happen, I don't know from where.
I want to start taking questions from the audience in just a little bit, but I know that you were wanting to say something.
Just one point to add about government responsibility, because sometimes young people are disadvantaged because of the legal arrangements within labor law. And that's why some of the major labor reforms of the recent period have been so important, like, for example, Italy, initiated by the government itself, improving the opportunities of the young generation, or in other countries like Germany. There would be necessary changes, for example, in the arrangement of occupational pension rights to improve the rights of the young generation. So there are many possibilities. The governments must take the action and they must take the initiative in order to improve the chances of young people and improve the conditions of work for them.
But those things should be done through social dialogue. A lot of the attacks on labour rights have been top-down, conditionality by the international institutions with no understanding of what that means. You know, if I go to my own country, because it's less rife with capacity for tension, I had a very big argument with a policymaker who's not elected, I might say, who told me that they had to take the price off labour. And in order to do that, they would change the situation around pensions and superannuation in Australia. I said, oh, would you? You could create a riot straight away, and you could undermine the only savings base in the nation, which is equal or greater now than the GDP of the country, which we negotiated with employers 30 years ago to take the burden off government of a long-term problem of demographics. So you have a mixed system of around 65% of income, 65 integrated in what is deferred wages by social dialogue, by agreement. Now, a policymaker saw that and said, we're going to take that away. I said, well, that'll cause a labour strike overnight. But so my only objection to what you say, Commissioner, and it's not your doing, is that a lot of those reforms labour reforms in Europe have been done top-down, and they're causing social unrest, even with employers who come to us, for example, and ask for us to advocate with government, still extension of collective bargaining to some extent, or the capacity for a minimum wage that is acceptable, because that right's been taken away from them. That's got to be put back into the equation if we're genuinely to have the respect between the three parties in the social dialogue.
Right, we're going to start taking questions from the audience. I promise we'll come back to you, Maurice, Lévy. We have roaming mics indeed. If you have a question, please just indicate it to me. Stand up, identify yourself, and please just go ahead and ask. We're going to start in the front row with Guy Ryder from the International Labour Organization.
Well, thanks very much. This discussion, a very interesting discussion, I must say, forms rather a sombre counterpoint to the upbeat thought that maybe we're getting out of the crisis. I mean, what we've heard today paints a very different picture. You know, you can't help thinking, listening to the panellists, that if we're waiting for growth to take up again, and that in the end is the big story, we actually do have a lost generation, and we might as well accept it as the lasting legacy of the crisis. Is that right? And secondly, we've heard a lot about the political responsibility of the state. What are the, and I would say the word, political responsibilities of business and indeed labour itself? Can business do more? Should business accept as a responsibility to take on more of the responsibility of skill formation, insertion of young people in labour markets? And secondly, do young people have to accept basically a lower path into the world of work? We hear a lot about the initial barriers to labour markets. Do young people have to accept lower standards as a way in the hope of graduation to something approaching what they would accept as a decent living working life?
All right, a few questions there. Let's start with Maurice Lévy. I suppose that one of your questions was directed at him. Should big business take more of a responsibility?
I cannot speak for the business as a whole. I can speak for myself and for my company. And my answer, and my straightforward answer, is simple yes. We have a responsibility towards society. Obviously, we should not forget that our first responsibility is toward our shareholders. But as society has evolved, today we have equal responsibility toward all our stakeholders, and we cannot consider that the only purpose that we have, and we should be happy if we have delivered the right level of profit. We have to deliver this level of profit, we have to invest in people, we have to invest in innovation, and we have to take a step for the future. And we have to do all this, period. That's my responsibility, and for my company, this is what we do.
When it comes to the lower standards question, let me ask Rajeeb that. Should young people, should they settle? Should they accept that?
I don't think it's a case of settling. It might be a case of readjusting expectations, because we saw a lady in the video saying previously if you do a degree, you'd expect to just walk into work, and that's just not the case. And so I think candidates and graduates and young people in general need to be a bit more creative about the different paths into employment. And it may not be a straightforward path, but it might be you'd have to do some volunteering and internship here, and that, whether that is settling or not, it actually might end up being better for you, because I think traditionally when times were better, you might just fall into a career path which actually wasn't right for you. Whereas now you have an opportunity to even step back and actually see what do you like doing by tasting and trying out different things. I wouldn't like to just write it off as a lost generation. As an entrepreneur, I'm an eternal optimist, and I feel that's dangerous to say, well, let's just admit it, it's as a lost generation, because I feel that that might lead to some kind of complacency, and I feel that we cannot afford for that to happen.
Sharan Burrow?
Well, we certainly can't afford complacently, but knowing the work that Guy Ryder and the ILO does, I'm absolutely certain that's not where their intent is. What we have to do is take responsibility. We are parents, grandparents, brothers, sisters, whatever. We have a communal responsibility to see that our young people have purposeful opportunities and the dignity of work that we've all enjoyed. Now, the pathway question, let's accept that, in fact, there are many pathways into work and into careers, and some of us change jobs more often than our parents. But we have to look at what the portability arrangements, what's the mix of social protection, wages, training. We negotiate those things. Unions negotiate those things. So I would say equal treatment, but maybe the mix is different, Guy, rather than necessarily a lower standard. So, for example, training wages if you're on apprenticeship, or some other mix of equal treatment, but from a different point of view. And this is where I think we come back to the Commissioner's role as representative of government. There's no doubt that if you put a youth guarantee out there, you invite the social partners to the table, then between us all, we absolutely owe it to a generation. I mean, we're talking 60% in Spain. I'm sorry, but even in intergenerational wealth terms and the sustainability of demand and communities, that's a big loss. So let's try to rescue those people by all means. Let's not give up. But let's call a spade, because it might actually provide the shockwaves that say, why have we let this happen? Because that very fact is scandalous.
All right, more questions from the audience. Gentleman right there in the front.
My name is Han from Korea. I'm a chairman of Korea's International Trade Association. I'd like one question to Madam Burrow and one to Mr. D. To Madam Burrow, you discussed before that jobless growth. Well, we can analyze it and interpret it as a kind of some trends, because to compete in the global world, sometimes the automation is necessary. So I should say job intensity or employment intensity may be less than before. But when we say jobless growth, that means that really weakened the notion that jobs are coming from growth. And no growth, no production facilities, and no businesses may exist without employing some of the people. So what do you think about forgetting about jobless growth? What is important for us to promote growth, encourage growth? Because we know, although they are different in some intensity, it's clear that they will create jobs. So when we have some tendency of despising growth because they do not generate as much employment as before, then certainly the policy implications may be different. Another question to Mr. D. If young youth is given a chance for a job for a small company, which is much more employment intensive, but of course with a lower pay and somewhat worse environments and the big companies. If you are given a job offer from those small companies, are you happy to go? Because you know that by going to small companies, you can absorb the knowledge in a much more comprehensive way, from management to skills.
Should we start with that?
Absolutely. I think hit the nail on the head, because it's precisely that working in a startup, a small company, you can be working alongside the CEO, the founder. You really get that full exposure to the whole breadth of a business, rather than often, I'm generalizing here, but in a larger company, you might have a very specific function and just do that. So I think that's what we need to say to young people, that actually working in smaller companies can provide you with a very rewarding and fulfilling opportunity to really develop skills, but also progress faster. There's probably less layers for you to go up, and if you are really a good employee, you can really work your way up the ranks, because there probably aren't many ranks to work your way up through.
Do they agree to that?
So I think that there's some work that needs to be done. So I know that in the UK, attitudes are such that there's a preference towards to big corporates and the big brand names. But I think that is changing, and I think we could do a lot more to showcase the breadth of opportunities that are out there amongst SMEs.
Ms. Burrow, what about your question? Should we forget about the concept of jobless growth?
No, we shouldn't. Let me say, first of all, small to medium enterprises, the engine room of growth. So we want to see people in those jobs. Well, all we ask for is a minimum wage on which you can live that is pertinent to the environment. So again, social dialogue. Jobless growth, when the financial crisis hit, it absolutely exposed what we all knew. 40% of so-called growth in the global economy was in speculation. It was in products that people couldn't even understand. Where we talk about investment in the real economy, then it will drive jobs. That technological innovation that you talk about actually is driving jobs somewhere else. So those value-added chains we can quantify, and that's not an issue for us. But we want to see real economy growth, and that means job-centred growth, income-led growth, not the speculative environment that we've still failed to modify, because 5 years on we're still talking about financial regulation. Speculation's increased. It doesn't help any of our children or grandchildren find a job. So let's focus on the real economy, which actually underpins and strengthens our communities.
All right, time is passing quickly. I already have a producer shouting in my ear, telling us that we should be wrapping up at this stage. I want to ask you panellists, finally, what you've taken away from this session. Well, if you've learned anything new. Maurice, Lévy, briefly for us, what are you taking away?
The issue is there. We knew it before, we know it now, and before coming to the meeting, I said, okay, I would be very much surprised that we find a solution. But if the discussion can lead to something which will help finding the solution, this would be great. And I think that this panel discussion has helped.
Rajeeb?
I think having a whole spectrum of perspectives from government, trade unions, employers and startups has been really helpful. And I think, in particular, that dialogue needs to happen with trade unions and businesses, because right now what we're seeing is that many employers are too scared to take on a young person. There's a lot of grey area about payment and non-payment. So if we can really have that dialogue, as you say, Sharan, we can probably create an environment where more employers would be more receptive to taking on young people.
Well, I'm always inspired by young people who have confidence, skills, and the societal values to say they want to make a difference. I want to thank these two. I think Maurice and I can create a pact that goes forward saying business and labour must work together in the interests of solving this problem for sustainable futures, but for our children and grandchildren. And I'm delighted, frankly, that the Commissioner who we work with acknowledges that we haven't acknowledged this problem to date, but now the European Union is, and with his leadership and others, let's get that youth guarantee. Let's make the dialogue happen to see it possible.
All right, we have a new entente cordiale here on stage in Davos between big business and the unions. Momentarily. Jonathan Teklu.
I take away that the problem is way bigger than I've expected. I wasn't really focusing on that, and I find it very interesting that when I think about the companies, that they have issues in hiring people, and there are so many unemployed people. There might be some innovation in the field of bringing those two parties together, and I will definitely start thinking about that from now on.
Commissioner Andor.
Well, business and labour are committed to work together. We have a great potential for entrepreneurship. In the European Union, we have to start by fixing the monetary union, fixing the business model, having proper industrial policy and development spread to all regions. and have specific schemes focusing on the unemployed youth, like the Youth Guarantee, because otherwise this particular generation will not make progress, will not be able to integrate into a prosperous European society.
All right, I'm going to tell you what I'm taking away from this discussion, and that is that growth is central to this issue. Without growth, we're probably not going to be able to resolve this problem. And as part of that growth contract, perhaps we have a new deal between unions and big business. That's good news in my opinion. Also education, the need to tailor-make education and education programs for the needs of the labour market, also to encourage entrepreneurship. That seems to be one of the messages that I've been getting from you 5 panel participants. I want to thank all 5 of you for participating in this discussion. It has been a pleasure moderating this debate. I also want to thank you, the studio audience. Thank you very much for showing up and for asking us questions. And finally, but certainly not least, I want to thank you at home for watching France 24 and this special debate coming to you from Davos. Stay with us. We have more news coming your way.